All right, so top 20 auto top-off mistakes. I've made the mistakes, you've made them, unless you're a genius or super lucky, and often they're really catastrophic mistakes, either for the tank or your home, so you'd like to avoid them. If you haven't had one of these issues yet, make sure to watch today because you can avoid them altogether.
Oh yeah, and even if you have had them before, some of us get a little rusty, and I've even made some of these mistakes in the recent past, so good refresher for everybody else.
All right, so number one is actually reducing the reliance on these devices by?
Yeah, the mistake here is not considering that you can actually reduce the amount of evaporation and, put some lids on or stop, as much turbulent surface area agitation at the top of your tank. And then that limits the amount of reliance you have on the ATO and dumping in water constantly.
That was actually one of my favorite things about the old BioCubes.
Oh,
it had the lid on there.
Yeah.
It probably evaporated like a cup of water a week.
Yep.
There's no reason for an auto top off in that case. Just dump a cup of water in there a week, it was fine. I did trap like heat and not the perfect gas exchange. So there is a trade-off in all of this.
Right.
But if you want to limit the amount of water that you evaporate into your house or the consumption of your auto top off, you can just aim your pumps a little lower so it's just not as turbulent on the surface of the water. You can not have a fan or anything going across the top of it. So if you're you have a fan in your hood or whatever, consider whether or not you actually need it.
Yeah.
And then actually the tops on aquariums, like a tight fitting hood or even the glass sheets on the top of it, can actually dramatically reduce it, like go from maybe 20-to-1 reduction. Yeah. You will reduce some light and some other things along with it, but if evaporation is a problem in your house, there are solutions. All right, number two, this is probably one of the most important with this specific device.
Yeah, the mistake here is not walking through the mental process and not considering what happens or what will happen if it fails. And that's failing in the on position and constantly filling up your tank, or even just not turning on at all. So, there's both sides of the coin that you have to consider here, and this is a common mistake.
So every single device on your aquarium, as long as you're successful for a matter of years, is going to fail. So you have to think about what's going to happen when this thing gets stuck on or it gets stuck off. In any case, you have to understand that. And so getting stuck on often means that I'm going to flood my tank with fresh water, but also like
Salinity.
What's underneath it? Do I have Brazilian hardwood floors or something? Is it just cement, so maybe not a big deal? Do I have like Kalkwasser in my auto top off, so the pH is going to skyrocket? Also, how would I know if it failed off and it was slowly losing all the water and possibly going to run my sump dry, which in case it may burn up my return pump, depending on the return pump that you have. So what happens? Like how long, a lot of sumps, that little compartment where your return pump is the first thing to dry up.
Oh yeah.
How long do I got? Is it a matter of hours? Because if it only holds 2 gallons of water, it might be in a single day that this thing stops operating and then you lose your return pump, which is actually the lifeblood of the whole system. So really think about that and then start to think, how could I avoid those issues? All right, number three should actually be like the number one biggest no-no of all the things in reefing.
Yeah, that's the mistake here is relying on float switches alone. So, some of the older top-offs of the day that were just getting started relied on a high-level float switch to turn off and a low-level float switch to turn on. And those were in your sump. Those were in the, the salty creep areas, the precipitate areas, and it's a moving mechanical piece which is just prone to fail at some point in time.
Yeah, so here's the big deal here, right? Is this thing, whether it's this design or the more typical float down here, is this thing rests at the water level exactly where salt creep collects, exactly where, like on the top of it, snails crawl across, organic films build up. This thing will always get stuck. It's just wet. You know, and it's not one of those mythical wens like between here and 10 years from now.
No.
It will fail quite frequently in many cases. So the float switch alone is just not a good enough solution, and you should either back it up with a float valve or multiple float switches or even dissimilar technologies like an electrical eye as well. All right, so number 4 is something we just talked about for a second ago. It's super valuable.
Yeah, this is missing the value of a float valve. So not a float switch where the float switch tells electronics to turn off and on, but a float valve that's just non-electrical, independent, dissimilar type of technology, and it holds back water by pressure, closing the valve. So like you said, it's just like your toilet or float valve in that, once the toilet fills up or once my ATO reservoir fills up, water stops coming through because the valve is closed.
This is actually a perfect addition to any ATO, but if you're going to buy one of the, try to save some money and get one of the cheaper ATOs out there, you can get them for like $60, then the $12 edition of a float valve, just drill a hole in your sump. There's drill bits for plastic, there's drill bits for glass, they're super easy. Just drill a hole in there, put this little float valve in there, and now even if your ATO's optical eye fails, the electronics inside fails, the float switch fails, this mechanical valve actually works really well at just stopping the flow of water. All right, so number 5, I was super guilty of this early on, and I didn't really understand it, and I let it go too far.
Yeah, this goes back to that evaporation conversation and missing the salinity changes that happen with auto top off. So either if I got a small tank or even somewhat larger tank and I'm so used to just, I walk by it every morning and I'll dump a cup in or I'll dump a gallon in, maybe you miss a day, maybe you miss 2 days, and the salinity just starts to rise because only water evaporates, not salt.
Yeah, so salt is staying in the tank, water's going, and so what people are missing is all the levels are going up with that. So the calcium levels are going up as it gets more concentrated, the alkalinity levels are getting more concentrated. Every single element in the whole tank is getting more concentrated as the water level goes down, salt stays, water goes. So early on for me, as I had a pretty busy life right about that point in time. So sometimes in my first tank, dude, I would see the water level get below the trim sometimes, and it'd be a few gallons of water to go in there. So I now know. Yeah. So that's one of the biggest values of an auto top off is it doesn't just keep salinity and water levels the same, which is visually attractive. It's keeping every single element in the tank stable. All right, so number 6 is something that has a double-edged sword to it. So you really got to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, this one is mistakenly sizing your ATO reservoir improperly. So, I've got a 40-gallon tank. 5 gallons will probably get me through a week, maybe. But on a 200-gallon tank, my little 5-gallon reservoir, probably not going to get me but like 2 days, maybe 3 days. In the reverse of that, though, I do have to be cognizant of, okay, so I've got a 40-gallon tank and I have a 10-gallon reservoir. That means I have 10 gallons available if something happens to go into my tank.
And it will always fail when it's full. It happened to me once, 10 gallons of kelp went in there, and then the reason I woke up, I heard that little pump gurgling, and normally I would have slept through it, but somehow I knew that I just filled that thing that day.
So for it to be empty.
Yeah, so big deal. So size this thing to the right size of your tank, because it goes back to that first thing, which is making sure you're thinking about what happens if it does fail. Will 10 gallons of water kill my tank? Probably you got a 100-gallon tank, 10 gallons of water, the tank's probably going to live through that. But will the floors?
Yeah.
And what will happen below that? If you got 10 gallons of water that hits the floor, is there an electrical panel that's below that? Or is there like a nice sofa in your basement that's below that? Think about all the different things that can happen and how much water, will your sump and tank hold if it overflows? Because you probably don't want to go above whatever the sump is going to hold. But I also don't want to go so low that, what's the point of having it out of top off if I got to fill it every 2 days?
Yeah, true.
So the nice in-between for me is generally trying to find something that will get me through a week. So every Sunday I can just go fill up part of my weekly maintenance, go fill it up. So just think about the size and in relation to safety and convenience. All right, so number 7, this is for all of you that don't have a sump or use an all-in-one system. What is it?
Yeah, the mistake here is not considering the siphon that can happen by running my tube up to the top of the tank, but putting the tube inside of the tank and thinking when it pumps water in, that's fine. But once that pump shuts off, it's starting to back siphon my tank down into my ATO box. My ATO box, my little 5-gallon ATO box, probably can't handle the amount of water that's coming down its way.
So never ever submerge the tube up here, because as soon as the pump turns off, it's just going to drain water until it goes back down in there. All right, so that's for all of you all-in-one tank owners, as well as those of you who don't have a sump, because that's where you're going to port the water into. And I know this because I made that mistake once, so you don't have to be me. All right, so number 8. Back when I used to answer the phones, this is a really common issue. People got really mad about it, but it's just physics. It's not a failure of any particular design. So what is it?
Yeah, this is not considering for the siphon in the sump. So you have a sump, you're feeding your ATO into the sump, and when your pump shuts off, it keeps pumping water, and you just can't figure out why my ATO reservoir keeps draining so fast, and why I keep filling up my tank and it just doesn't shut off. And so I've gotten the phone call too. My pump's not shutting off. Well, it's the output of your ATO is at or lower than the water level in your ATO reservoir. And so when the pump shuts off, it just gravity feeds and fills it back up. But there are answers.
So the clarity stake here, your water level here in your sump, in your ATO box, is higher than the point at which you feed into the sump. As soon as it starts pumping water in there, it's going to create a siphon, and it's just going to drain down to that point. So you really got to think about this, because this is probably one of the most common failures of any ATO, but there are some solutions.
Yeah, so this one, you could mount it higher. You can make sure that, okay, I go and measure my ATO reservoir box, and it's 20 inches. Well, I'm just going to go over here, measure 20 inches, and make sure that the tip of my output hose is 20 inches or above.
Yep. Another solution is you could use like a little push connect fitting and drill a hole in the side of it to make a siphon break inside of your container. It'll probably leak a little bit of water, but it'll leak it into your reservoir, no big deal. But then when it turns off, it will suck air in and break the siphon.
My favorite one that you come up with was take a half-inch piece of PVC tubing or any type of tubing, and then just build a tall tower that you can actually just feed your ATO into, so that way you're not splashing in the tank, it's going down the tube, but you're mounted definitely higher than your ATO reservoir, and a little piece of the PVC tubing is pretty unobtrusive in the sump.
Yeah, there's all kinds of solutions to this, but just make sure you know if your container for your auto top-off is taller than the point you feed into your sump, you're probably going to have problems. All right, so number 9 is actually something that all of you that watch a lot of BRStv probably are familiar with, but if you don't, a lot of people are missing.
Yeah, this missing the value of the flow lock, and that is you splice your RO tube feeding your tank or feeding your ATO reservoir, and you put this little mechanical switch in there that if it senses water, it expands a piece of cotton or what have you inside, flips open a valve and shuts the water off. So no electronics, no nothing, simple.
So here's the thing, is there's all kinds of leak sensors and contraptions out there, like the Apex has them. They're not, you got to have an Apex, you have to have all the sensors, it's kind of expensive. There's actually really simple solutions to this as well, and that's a flow lock again. It's just this little cotton pad that expands and triggers a valve, right? Soaks up the water. So for probably less than 15 bucks, you can put this thing wherever you think that the water would overflow from if it did go over the edge and your auto top-off failed. Put it there, and that $15 thing will save your floors, whatever needs under it, and also probably save up some mopping as well. All right, so number 10 is also one I used to get a lot on the phone, and I experienced myself for the first few times, so I know exactly how it goes.
Yeah, this is assuming that Kalkwasser won't hurt your ATO pump, and it's pretty caustic, and it also builds up. It builds like a precipitate type film in there, especially if you have your pump in the sludge at the bottom of it, or if it comes in contact with it. So there is now a lifespan on your pump if you're using it with caulk.
Yeah, super caustic, and there's really high levels of calcium and alkalinity in the water often, So when you submerge it in there, it is going to wear out the pump way faster. So pumps like this guy right here, I found that they last somewhere between 9 and 12 months, and then they're done if you're going to use them inside of a Kalkwasser solution. So just know that. I mean, you're using it in the harshest environment possible, so you're probably going to wear out the pumps faster than if it was just fresh water. Number 11 here is something that when I say it out loud, I know it, but like I learned it the hard way.
Yeah, this is the mistakes here, assuming that the ATO just doesn't need to be maintained, and that's just not true. Especially, some of those optical sensors, especially like the float switches, they get buildup on them, and they get precipitate on them. The pump itself gets, some buildup and stuff, and they just need to be cleaned. And that's like it goes with every mechanical piece of equipment in our tanks. At some point in time, it either needs to be maintained or it's going to fail faster.
Yeah, so here's the thing, is like most of the time when I see, people talk about how their ATO failed, my first question is, when's the last time you cleaned it? Well, never. So like a thing like this, a water level sensor isn't designed to operate perpetually without any maintenance or cleaning any of the gunk that stops the moving parts or the optical eye gets dirty. Of course it needs to be cleaned, right? And so you might be saying, well, I don't want it. Well, you can actually buy some options that don't need to be cleaned as often. The more redundancy it has allows you a little bit more effort or wiggle room rather in that. Part of the reason why I like the Oscillator so much is it's just never failed me on. The various redundancy catches each other. But it is something that you do need to maintenance. You do need to clean the moving parts, the optical eyes that read water. If you don't, you should expect it to fail. All right, so number 12 is something I heard tons and tons of people say you just shouldn't do categorically, and I think it's just wrong.
Yeah, the mistake is thinking that you can't do this automatically. You can't auto top off straight from your RODI, and you absolutely can. And it's something that we've started to adopt in multiple tanks around here. You guys have seen it on the BRS 160, how we've got the multiple layers of redundancy. We're using a solenoid, tied to switches and optical sensors in the tank. But that's backed up with float valves, backed up by flow lock, has a watchdog back there. And so an auto flush on our RODI, so there's a bunch of those layers that we did to make it available to us.
I would call it just risk management.
Yeah.
So you are hooking up basically a never-ending water supply directly to your tank. That sounds like bad news, and in some ways it actually is. However, if your tank is going to thrive because you have more time available to do other things for the tank, maybe it isn't, So, and you're not constantly running your ATO drop box dry and all kinds of other issues. So if you hook up your RO system directly to your tank, do it safely, meaning use the float valve. That will be probably the redundancy. You use a solenoid, the solenoid will fail, so make sure just to change those things out periodically. So I would say change it every 6 months, but definitely every year. Don't wait for it to fail, because it is probably the biggest failure point in the whole thing. And then also use the things like flow locks, and that thing really doesn't, I've never seen one fail. It soaks up water and triggers it, and so between those three things, if all of those things fail, maybe you just weren't meant to have a tank. And I say that facetiously, but like really there is a point where you can do risk management. And again, if the thing's over $40,000 floors and all this other fancy stuff, maybe you don't want to do that. If it's in your basement and it's not going to hurt anything, or you just trust these levels of redundancy, it can absolutely be done. All right, so number 13, I basically just said it.
Yeah, I know. The mistake is to trust the solenoid. These are powered valves, so they power on, they open, they turn off, they close. So, as many times as you think about how many times your ATO turns off and on in a day, a week, a month, a year, and this thing is constantly powering on and off and on and off, and things, pieces of equipment that do that have a lifespan.
Yeah, so I've found that almost all of these things last no more than a year. And so they generally heat up and get really hot, and then any calcium or anything in the water tends to gunk it up. And so for me, I would only trust them to a point. They're like almost like a check valve. They are maybe the primary thing, but man, you need to back this up for sure, and with different mentalities. So if you use a solenoid on anything in your tank, make sure that you replace it beforehand, and don't, if it fails and you haven't thought about how it would fail, you probably haven't done your homework, and it's probably going to have a really negative result in your tank. So solenoids should only be trusted to a point. They should be maintained and actually replaced frequently. All right, so number 14, this is one that I think Thomas did a video on recently, and a lot of people here didn't actually even know much about. Yeah, this is missing the Tunze RO water controller. So, you think about it,
my RODI unit, we're told to flush it before each use for 5 to 15 minutes to get rid of some TDS creep and things like that might build up. But if I have this hooked directly to my ATO reservoir to my tank, that means I'm missing like the flush, and all it is just refilling every time that the valve goes down and up. So I'm barely, refilling this thing. And this is where the Tunze RO water controller comes in that I have a high float switch, I have a low float switch, and it allows me to drain my entire ATO reservoir first, then kick on the RODI water, so that way I'm getting, straight flush or straight fill from my RO, and essentially reducing some TDS creep.
Yeah, so if you have like 500 TDS water like I have at my house, when you turn it on, it's going to be 100 TDS, right? I'm going to burn through resin like nobody's business. But even for you at home, if you've got like 100 TDS water and it probably turns on at like, somewhere between 10 and 15, not a big deal if you're just going to use a batch and the first gallon of water is that way or whatnot. But if you hooked it directly up to your tank and it's constantly turning on and off, and it's basically just going to be feeding 10 to 15 TDS into your resin and burn through it. So this is one of those solutions, the RO controller that they make, which again will fill a bin up all at once, and then you can draw from that, and then it won't turn back on until it hits the low point, at which point it will fill back up again. So this is a great solution, specifically if you're going to hook it up right to your tank and you want to manage TDS creep. But really anybody that wants to manage TDS creep, it allows you to make large batches of water all at once without all the effort of manually turning it on and off. All right, so number 15, you've heard me actually say one specific product for like a decade, and there's a reason for this.
The mistake here is trying the latest, greatest, newest gadget. So I've got 3 optical sensors, I've got 4, I've got 8, I've got a dozen, all these layers of redundancy built in. And just kind of getting sucked into that new latest technology and being the pioneer that tries that stuff out. And like you say all the time, pioneers often get shot in the back.
It's true. They find new lands.
Yeah, they do.
And it's fun. But this is one of those cases where, like, I don't really care about the glitz. I just want you to replace the fresh water that my tank evaporated. I don't need fancy functions or anything like that. The oscillator does that the best for me. We use it every single tank here, and I just trust it. Like, I have never encountered one myself that has failed in the on position. They do get dirty, a little eye, and won't turn on sometimes, but that's just maintenance. On is what I'm really worried about. It's never happened to me, and so it's what I trust. And then all the new stuff that comes out, like, I feel bad actually for all the new ATOs that come out, because I will just never recommend them. It will take years of personal use and seeing other people use them, because when this thing goes, it can catastrophically mess up my house and my tank, and it's just one area where I want to use something that is the most trusted option out there. All right, so number 16, I get asked this all the time, and you can't.
Yeah, it's the mistake is using the Tunze Nano on a large tank, and it probably has Nano in its name for a reason. I mean, there's some limited run times on it, and there's really only one float valve or float switch. So when you're looking at this thing from like a cost-saving standpoint, if you've got a large tank, just spend the extra money and get the one that's appropriately sized for that tank.
Yeah, so I think the mentality here is like, I know the oscillator name, but I want to save some money.
Yeah.
Right, because it's a lot cheaper. But the thing is it has an internal timer, so it will only like allow so much water through it before it just turns off.
Yeah.
So it is not appropriate for a tank this size, and so make sure that you get the right tool for the right job, and the Nano is for nanos. All right, so number 17, there's actually little hidden Easter eggs inside of some of these boxes that you may have never known about, and most of you probably actually don't.
Yeah, this is, the mistake here is missing those hidden Easter eggs and missing some of those hidden features in some of these. A lot of especially the oscillators, but even like the JBJs and stuff, they have some, internal timers before they shut off, pump speeds and all this other stuff. So specifically like on the Nano, the Tunze Nano, you can adjust whether it's for tanks up to 25 gallons. I can have my flow rate or my max flow time set to 1.45, so about a minute and a half. But if I have a larger tank and I need it to run longer, then I can just change this little prong over one space, and now I'm at 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, so you can change the amount of time that it's on and change how much water can go in there.
Yeah.
So get a little bit extra, maybe not as nano, but also not a super huge tank.
Yeah.
All right. So inside of this oscillator, there's actually a little dial in there. And so you can change the head pressure and flow rate of the pump. So you can tune it down. And so why would I want to tune it down? Well, what if I just don't need that much water? I don't want it to pump water in very fast because then the internal timer or limiter won't go off when you have too much water go there. So I should actually tune it to just about above what I actually need, give it some time to slow down and whatnot. Or, it goes up to like 4 meters, I believe. So if you really need to get extra height out of it for some reason, you can crank it up. Also inside of there is alarm setting. So maybe I want the alarm to only go off if the float switch gets triggered. But I can also have the alarm go off if the time limiter, meaning it's been on for 10 minutes, so it just turns off. The alarm goes off then. Or maybe I just don't like alarms because I let mine run dry all the time. And I just turn the alarm off. There's a little jumper in there that you can switch. Also, same thing inside the JBJ. That one has a little dial in there. You can take it apart, and there's a little screwdriver in there. You can change the time at which it just automatically turns off. So make sure to actually read the instructions of some of these things because there's hidden little gems in a lot of them. All right, so number 18 is actually kind of close to something we just talked about.
Yeah, this is not considering the head pressure of the pump. So, I mean, there are little pumps like this, and they can only pump water so high up. And so a lot of tanks, the standard tank is probably like 4.5-ish feet, maybe, if you're pumping up to the top of the tank. But even then, you have to understand the limitations of this pump. So I can't have this thing in my basement and try to pump it upstairs. But some of them do come with, adapters that you can swap out and put your own pump on there so you can, adjust to meet your own needs. But there are limits to how high these things can pump.
So if your auto top-off you're buying comes with a pump, I'll say most notably this teeny little guy is you really want to think about whether or not that's the right tool for the right job. If your sump's only a foot off or 2 feet off the floor, probably any pump is going to work. But if I'm pumping to the top of a tank, a different solution. Or if I need to go a pretty good distance horizontally, I should think about that. So think about it. I know the Tunze oscillator is probably the best pump of all of the auto top-offs that come with the pump. I think I can say that pretty confidently.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I can't think of actually one that's even close.
The PMUP might have a pretty good head pressure on it too, but I think this one has been proven.
The PMUP actually probably has, or the ATK, when it comes with the PMUP, probably has way more head pressure actually, but also a price tag that comes with it. So just think about what the right tool, right job, and get the right size head pressure for the solution or height or vertical length that you want to pump your ATO water. So number 19, they do fail. So what is that?
I mean, some of our gear we have to replace, heaters, everything. These things need to be replaced, and every once in a while your pump's going to go out, and you need to replace it. So the mistake is not considering the replacement cost of the pump. Some pumps, depending on where you got your ATO, it might be hard to find just the pump alone as a replacement. You might have to buy the whole thing, or there's other ones that are cost effective. I think the Tunze oscillator is like a $25 pump replacement. So it makes it, especially if you're replacing it because you're using it in Kalkwasser or you're just going to preventatively maintenance it, consider the cost of the replacement pump and how does that fit into your maintenance rhythm.
I'm going to take this one step further.
Yeah.
When you're shopping for an ATO, go and look and see if you can readily buy the replacement pump. Because it is like a moving part that will wear out, right? So you're going to want to make sure that is available. If it isn't available as an option, I just skip that option entirely.
Not on my list.
So make sure that whatever ATO you got has a readily available replacement pump, and hopefully that it's affordable as well. All right, so number 20 is actually one of my favorite projects of all time. Number 20 is missing the fact that you can hide your ATO reservoir. So I don't need this or a garbage can or something, sitting right next to my tank and looking ugly and things like that. I can actually make it a piece of furniture. I think I got a 40 breeder off of Craigslist one time, and it was the whole set, and he actually had a footstool side box that he made his own acrylic ATO reservoir.
held 10 gallons, was all marked up. But the best part is I could actually sit on it, change my shoes and stuff down by the, or over by the door, and it just would function like a regular piece of furniture.
Yeah, so I started off with a bucket next to my tank, and then I ended up with like a little like plastic container with a little rug that was over it, just to try to like hide it to some degree. But it was always ugly. And so one of the things you can do if you can't fit something like this inside of your sump area, this obviously looks nicer than a bucket.
Yeah.
But outside of that is go to your like favorite like home goods or discount furniture store, and you can almost always find a footstool, a chest, or a type of piece of furniture that you can put next to the tank that looks totally normal next to the tank. Then put your container in there. And in fact, some of the projects we've done is built acrylic cases that fit perfect inside.
It's easy,
right? So like go to one of those home good places. For $50 you can find a nice piece of furniture that goes next to the tank, matches your decor, and you never know that there was a bucket of water inside. All right, so if there's one thing that everybody takes away more than everything else, what is it?
Yeah, for me, it's the float valve. And don't miss the value of $13, $12, whatever it is, and how much that can save your floors, your tank, your life, essentially. Because I'm gonna hook my RODI up straight to it, you know, because I like to have my box filled or my ATO reservoir filled all the time. I'm gonna put it in here, and I'm gonna run an ATO out of here. So I have to say the float valve, get yourself one if you don't have one.
Yeah, so I rarely am in complete agreement with Randy here, but actually this is the one takeaway for me as well. So whether you get something super advanced like the osmolator that's like just produce some of the best results, or you get a much less expensive option, you can back that up with this $13 little tool, drill a hole in your sump, put it in there, and now like you really have probably reduce the chances of an issue probably like by 30, 40 fold.
That's
of
huge.
Both of these things failing at the same time. And considering how big a deal it is when an ATO fails, this is just such a cheap, easy solution. So if you want to see the best, and you can see the cheapest, you can see the best, and actually a bunch of them that are best at very specific applications that may be something in your house, our best of the year auto top-off video is right here.